Hi, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events podcast. And in this week's episode, you're going to hear just from me all about my journey with the Winter Olympics, where I most recently was working at the Milano Cortina 2026 Winter Olympics as an associate venue producer. So I take you behind the scenes with me in this episode about some of the lessons I've learned, what that experience was like, and some advice for you if you're looking to get a gig at a future Olympic Games.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Hi, friend. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. I'm Logan Clements, and this week is a solo episode. Mary and I tend to do these when life gets busy, when we're busy executing events. She had an amazing episode last week where she was with Jessica Zimmerman talking all about parental leave as an event professional. I know I enjoyed listening to it as someone who hopes one day to also take some parental leave in my career, and I just liked their comparing and contrasting of being both an internal as well as an internal event pro and running your own business and what parental leave looks like for you. So go back and listen to that. But this week, you're just going to hear from me, and I'm taking you behind the scenes of my first Winter Olympics. And to tease, I guess, this episode to get you into it is one of the most surreal moments of my career happened here at the Winter Olympics this year. I had been to a Winter Olympics in the past as a volunteer back in 2018, but this year was the first year that I got to do a Winter Olympics in a paid capacity. And I just remember there was this really cool moment where the athletes are standing on their podiums, they have their medals around their neck, the flags are waving, and the national anthem is playing. And I was like, wow, I'm doing this. And it was really cool because while I've worked other Olympic games, summer games specifically, I actually had never called a Olympic medal ceremony before. And this Olympics, I got the opportunity to call not just one, not just two. I think by the end of it, I called 8 or 9 because I was working in an individual sport. And every time I did it, my nerves were very high because it's a lot of pressure. It's a very simple kind of script we follow for these medal ceremonies, but it was the Olympics and I was working it. It was just this moment. I feel like I had a small mini out of body, and then you hone right back in. Cause like I said, it's a very simple show flow, but it is also incredibly important. And if you've listened to the podcast before, you might remember that I've talked about working at the Paris Olympics on the broadcast side, or my experience in Tokyo where I was working, doing a very similar role to what I did in Milano Cortina, but I worked a team sport where there wasn't as many medal ceremonies. They were just at the end. And I ended up not being the one calling those games. The other venue producer did. So this Winter Games was such a different experience than what I've had in the past couple years. Again, there were fans there. I was back on the sports presentation side. My official title was associate venue producer. You'll see me use a lot of terminology really interchangeably, but one thing that's pretty consistent no matter what country the games are hosted in is anything related to game presentation. What I do of entertaining the fans who buy a ticket and come to the games, they call the lead person. The person is called the venue producer. They're usually the one show calling it. And then the associate venue producer is helping the venue producer. And often that person, the AVP, is often there to help them with scripting, confirming details. We work with so many different parties from sport to broadcast to scoring and timing results. And they just kind of help coordinate and wrangle all of that. One of the unique things about the team I was on that we had a venue producer, but we also had me, and I have been a venue producer before, even though I was in the AVP role. And that was on purpose because our sport being at the Lavigno Snow Park, where there was all the snowboarding events and a lot of the freestyle skiing events, our days were very long. And so to make it a little less long, there were 2 of us that could be the show caller. So my venue producer and I actually worked out shifts. One of us was the day shift, one was the night shift, so that we weren't there for 18 hours a day for 2.5 weeks in a row. So that was something that was pretty unique. And so I wasn't focused on the broadcast this time. Unlike Paris, this time I was focused on that fan experience and the people who bought the tickets and were attending live. So I'm going to take you behind the scenes of more of what that looks like, it goes into entertaining fans at Olympic events, and what it was like to show call my first medal ceremony, because it was a lot, and it was amazing. So normally I would have Mary here to ask me questions, but since she's not, I think I'm gonna like borrow her role a bit and just go through some of the questions that she might have had for me, or maybe even you, listener, have for me about the Winter Games. So I feel like the first one, I got into it a little bit already because I'm just excited about this topic, is what does an associate venue producer actually do at the Olympic Games? So, like I said, you're part of the sports presentation team, SPP. They love their acronyms in the Olympic world, but you're part of the sports presentation team. Associate venue producer usually is assisting the lead venue producer, who is the show caller, and the associate is helping writing those scripts, those show flows, hunting down all the information, like where we get the names of presenters for the medal ceremonies is not in the same place as where we would get our information for what entertainment we're going to have at our venue, or if the mascot's going to be coming. And so just helping kind of wrangle all of those pieces. You're on site during all the event days, including you're on site for probably a week or two before the games start. I was there for about a week before we started competition, helping just set up our control room, figure out where everybody is sitting, make sure we're not missing anything, printing out schedules to hang up, and just kind of creating that work atmosphere for folks. And then the unique thing that I did that was not normal for an associate venue producer was the fact that I have been the venue producer. I was able to show call and help kind of take that burden on with my fellow venue producer. And that was really cool because, one, I love working with other people because I think I learn a lot from hearing and seeing how other people do things in that lead producer role. But I also did get to show call my first medal ceremony, which was something that I was very open with my venue producer. He called the first few days, because I said, I know I'm going to have to do it for the first time at some point. But it was really stressful to do it just because it is, lots of eyes on you, a lot of, that's the one where TV is telling us they're ready. And then you are the one, when you're cueing it, you're the one going and telling the medalists to come out onto the podium, to get up on the podium, to announce their name, to announce the national anthem, to play the national anthem. So there's just so many very high stress parts of that, even though the actual concept of it is incredibly basic, of very simple steps for you to do. But everything just has to be perfect. And so that's where that stress comes in. Also, if you haven't listened to any of my episodes about what game presentation or sports presentation does, we are the entertaining of the fans who come in person. So we're playing the music that the fans and the athletes hear while they're competing. We're doing all of the announcing in the venue, that is both announcing their names, and for these sports I was working, it was doing some live commentary while the sport was happening, explaining the tricks and the progress the athletes were making down the course. We also do some fun crowd engagement things. Think your dance cam. My personal favorite was a freeze cam we did because it was the Winter Olympics, to entertain folks during breaks. We had replays, and the medal ceremonies was a really big part of our event. So a second question I say is, how does the in-venue production fit in with the broader Olympic ecosystem? So this is one where I think we are one piece of the very large puzzle. So sport, or the actual competition, so the snowboarding, they have their own federation and folks in charge of that group. They're setting the times for all the competition, they're setting the start lists, and then we need to work with them to make sure we know what athletes coming next and all of that. But then we're also working with broadcast, which is TV, and there's certain things that sport will default to broadcast for, but there's also things that broadcast follows sport for. Often broadcast is telling us what time they're going live, and that's also dependent on what time the sport was starting. That's how I then take that time and kind of work backwards for how much time I have to fill with entertaining fans and things like that. And then if there's any breaks, broadcast often would need breaks for their broadcast partners to be able to show commercials. And so understanding and hearing in real time, because sometimes it's a live sport, just like any live event, things can run behind or they can run early. And so we often were shifting some of those timings. So I would maybe get a longer break than I was anticipating, or a shorter break than I was anticipating, and we would adjust. And then we also work with the venue team. So the folks that are in charge of the logistics for the fans who come in person. So this is everyone who manages security, what time the gates open, food and beverage, all of that. And for me, most important was the gate open time, because it was, okay, from when gates open to when sport says the sport's going to start and broadcast is going to start, then I have that amount of time to fill, was kind of what I worked with. And then our team for sport presentation was consisting of, we had MCs, we had announcers. The MCs, you saw them on camera. The announcers, you more heard their voice. They were more sport specific versus the MCs were more entertainment, fan facing specific. We had DJs, we had audio operators, we had a video operator, we had graphics and playback, we had multiple camera people, and we also had what we were calling production assistants, but they were kind of like our glorified stage managers running around and helping out there. And that was our sports presentation team. In addition to that, we had several engineers. We also have an entire victory ceremonies team, which you heard me say medal ceremonies. The traditional protocol way is to call it a victory ceremony, but I will be calling it probably a medal ceremony for this episode for most of you. But just know if you ever work the Olympics, they call it a victory ceremony. But that's kind of was all part of our SPP team, but we had a different producer who was leading the victory ceremony logistics, like laying out the medals, making sure all the military were ready, getting the actual athletes after the competition concludes so we can get them into that ceremony as quick as possible. So it's a lot of people and it's a lot of coordination from a lot of different angles. So what makes the scale of the Olympics different than any other event? Well, made this joke before on the podcast, but definitely the Olympics, like you use the term the Olympics of to describe any other event. So it's like, oh, March Madness might be the Olympics of college basketball. And I think that always just means when we think of the Olympics, we think of just how broad and large of a scale. And what it truly is, it's like having several Super Bowls happening at once. I mean, I can't remember off the top of my head how many winter sports there were. I want to say there were anywhere from 13 to 16 disciplines. So that's like having 13 to 16 Super Bowls happening at the same time, and all the stuff that goes into that, and all of the logistics from an event perspective that go into helping make, that large event. So just like the sheer size of it. And then because it's the Olympics, you have the global audience that's watching you at all times. So it's one of those things that's super cool to be on that large stage if you're an athlete, but it's probably also nerve-wracking. And I would say the same for probably what I was doing. It felt really exciting to be doing something so public facing. I work a lot of events that you've never heard of or I'm not able to talk about just because they're internal or private events. But this one is like a very public one, which is super cool, but also brings a lot of pressure to it. They also have very strict timing windows. Again, we're working with broadcast, but it's not just one broadcast partner like other sports I've worked with. It's like we're just working with ESPN. And so it all depends about ESPN's window that they have on their specific channel. But when you're doing the Olympics, they have global partners. And so any decision that the OBS of Olympic Broadcasting Services makes impacts all of their partners around the world, not just an NBC here in the US, but like all of their partners. So there were just certain things that, because it was a winter sport, weather was a factor. We had certain things that had to shift, and just knowing there's that many people relying on it and that many people need information before you can make a change. And then it was really cool for me. I mean, I've loved every Olympics that I've gone to, both as a fan when I volunteered in 2018 and then all the subsequent ones that I've worked. But I feel like one moment that really hit me like that this is the Olympics was when I was calling that medal ceremony of this is both the coolest thing I've ever done and probably the scariest thing I've ever done. And as much as I give myself my pep talk, and I gave this talk to a speaker that I worked with last week who was a first-time speaker. She'd never been on stage before and she was so nervous. And I said, something that helps me out, and I don't know if it'll help you, but everybody had to do something for the first time. Everybody, no matter who you look at, no matter where they are in life, everyone had to have a first time. And you hope when they did something for their first time that they were received with compassion and care, but maybe they weren't. They only got better by doing it and, again, learning and honing in their craft. And so that was for me was all right, I got eventually I have to call my first medal ceremony. So we're going to do it. And my heart is going to race and I'm going to be really nervous about it, but it went really well. I do laugh. I did get notified right after the Olympics. I went on vacation for 2 weeks and I wear a lovely Apple Watch, and it did notify me that my resting heart rate went down. I was at altitude in an altitude winter town. So I'm going to blame some of it on that. But I will also say that it didn't matter if it was my first ceremony or my last one I did that I think was my 8th or 9th. every time I could feel my heart racing. And it was just, I mean, I borrowed this from another very famous sports producer, Christy Nicolay. She and I had talked earlier in the year, and she mentioned she always tells people to take a deep breath on headset. And I borrowed that every single time. It was like, all right, everybody, take a deep breath. Like, we got this. And that was what we would do in the 30 seconds before we actually started the ceremony. And even though I was taking deep breaths, my heart rate was elevated because on vacation, I found out that my resting heart rate had dramatically decreased while I was on vacation. And I looked back at the data and it was like, oh no, it had spiked dramatically for the 3 weeks I was in Italy and then had come back down on my vacation. So again, a very fun project, but clearly just a little stressful. And I've talked about how this was a big milestone of calling my first medal ceremony, but like the pieces that go into it is there's a lot of protocols involved. There's literally protocol people to ensure that we are saying the, the presenters' names correctly. And there is very much a template that we use across the entire Olympic Games. So there's certain sequences of things that have to happen before something else happens. And it is not up to you at your venue to make that decision or change it. It's literally set across games wide. And so that's why it's a little stressful, because it is very obvious to those that have seen lots of these if we make a change. Maybe not obvious to you as a fan watching at home. If you only see clips of the medal ceremonies during, the highlights from your local broadcast, you might not have seen it. But there is a very specific protocol, and there's a very specific cues for, you cue the music, then the athletes come out. But once the athletes hit the field of play, meaning they're in the area the competition was happening, then we make this announcement. So there's certain beats that you really, really had to hit. And then I'd say the most stressful part was honestly the national anthem, just because I lovingly joke that you can cause an international incident by playing the wrong national anthem. But again, that kind of gets hit into your head from this minute you do any international sporting event. I've done medal ceremonies at the Pan American Games, the Pan American Games. So I've done this before, just not on the Olympic level, but the beats are the same and the stress is the same in the sense that you want to make sure your DJ is going to hit the tune for the anthem that is for Brazil, BRA, and make sure they didn't have dyslexia and say Barbados, BAR, because you're going off of acronyms for what these countries are. So you want to double check and triple check. And we've taken time in the days coming up to it to double check and listen to all these anthems and make sure there wasn't some human error where someone downloaded an anthem and then saved it under a different name. So that's usually the most stressful part, that you're double checking, triple checking, quadruple checking. We're standing by with the anthem of this winning country, like Italy, it'd be ITA. We're standing by with the anthem of Italy. We're making sure we don't jump a cue, because every announcement in a medal ceremony is done first in French, second English, third the language of the host country. So it was done in Italian. I'm thinking about already for LA 28, it'll just be in French and English. But the interesting part is your brain, if you've done something, you might go on autopilot if you've done this before, and you're an English speaker like myself, you're going to hear French, you're going to hear English. It's your instinct is to cue the next thing, but you need to wait for the Italian. And so it's always important, everybody, for every cue we're doing, you have to hear everything 3 times before you move on to the next element. So that was so important. And then the main thing is the kind of transition from sport into medal ceremony. Just you need to make sure that everybody is ready. My favorite lesson learned, and I'm taking that into any event and any project I do. It's very simple, but it's so helpful just to think about, is don't rush. And I'd already been telling this to some of my folks that when I work registration for an event or I have volunteers, don't let someone else rush you. And there are so many stakeholders at the Olympics. It is very easy to feel rushed. And my lead producer was just so don't rush. And I just would repeat it in my head that there were times where it's it's better to take the extra 30 seconds and be right than try to rush and just make sure it's done. And so that was something when we were getting ready for medal ceremonies, it would be double checking, triple checking, quadruple checking. We have the right names. We have the right athletes. We have everything correct. Everybody's ready. No one should feel rushed, because then if mistakes happen, you're going to go back and say, well, what was it? And maybe it was that person felt rushed. So don't rush. Take a beat. The extra seconds are worth it. Don't say you can't take an hour, but you can take a little more time. So that was probably the most pinch me moment of my Olympic experience, was doing that. And that rush didn't really go away no matter how many days, I was doing that. So What other lessons, I guess I could say for you listeners about the Olympics that could translate back to the rest of the event industry? So, one piece of advice I always give event professionals is knowing the time and the place to ask questions. And I think some folks are afraid to ask questions and they just make assumptions, and that's where things can go awry. And so, even though I have worked several Olympic Games and I'm familiar with the fact that they love to use acronyms for things, I found myself just constantly, especially in those setup days, those were the great time when we have plenty of time to ask those questions to clarify who is who. What's that acronym again? Who does that stand for? Oh, we just met with those people. Remind me, how do I need to talk to them on event day? Oh, where do we get results from? Are they going to come through the printer? Or do I need to go and knock on the door and get them from this other room down? All of those little things, that just asking those questions in that more relaxed setup time is so much better than either making assumptions and getting it wrong while we're in the heat of the moment, or not asking and then having to figure it out later, or asking that question right before we're about to go live. That is not the time to do it. So just making sure that you always ask those questions. And same thing when you're meeting, you meet a lot of people at the Olympics in both a good way and an overwhelming way, especially in those early days when you're getting set up and you're getting your feet under you of just figuring out who's who, and just asking that question of like, wait, what are you, can you remind me what is your role? What are you here for? There's also a lot of people just walking into your control room and they're being like, I have TVs. And it was like, what? Okay. Or I had someone say, I have a telephone. And I said, telephone? To talk to who? And they said, I don't know. We're just here to drop off a telephone. And I said, okay, I don't, we haven't had a telephone in the past, but let's put it right here. And you let me know once you know who I'm supposed to talk to on this, literally this wired telephone. And it was funny. And about an hour later, they came back and said, oh, it's the wrong room. It's supposed to go somewhere else. And I said, great. Cause I had no idea there was going to be a telephone we had to talk on. But there was a person who had to bring like TVs, and it was interesting to see what information they had compared to the information I had of like where those TVs would go. And I do have like a hack if you can't remember names, because I'm not always the best at remembering names, is I often will call this person my friend. So he was like my TV friend. And I did say this to his face of just like, oh my gosh, my TV friend. And it just like was a way of, I don't know, making it a warmer exchange than me trying to remember, like not acknowledging that I didn't know his name, but he kind of giggled at it and had fun with it. And that just helped. I feel like it adds like a positive, kind of impression whenever then I'm referring to him to somebody else. And I have definitely done that in other aspects of the events that I've worked. And then I also think it's really important, and this is basic, but I still see this getting missed sometimes in events, is just making sure you're setting really clear communication guidelines with your team. I have talked about how I think there needs to be books written about how to manage and build rapport with a team when you only have like 2 days to do so. Then you have to execute something. That is something we relied on a WhatsApp group with our team, and setting call times. It was something that we aspired to do, the call times in, by like 5 p.m. the day before for the next day. And we got better with it as the program went along. But just letting them know like, hey, where are you going to get the information of what time you have to come tomorrow? Where and how are we going to tell you if things change? Because they usually do. Do you need to eat? Where do you eat? When do you eat? All of that, kind of just taking care of people's like basic needs. That is something you just want to be proactive about. And we were pretty transparent on the times when we were like, we don't know what the schedule is for tomorrow, because sport and things and other people were still deciding. Because other stakeholders were still figuring that out, as we had to adjust with some weather things. But just making sure you're super clear with folks to know where to go for that information. Another thing that I learned from the Olympics that can translate to your other events is just, again, sticking with the idea that the people make the project. One of the things that I learned about the Olympics a couple times ago was you could be doing the Olympics and your dream job and you could still be tired. It's okay to be tired. And that was kind of hard to come to terms with, because I'm like, when it's your dream job, everything should be great. And it really was. But I also was tired because the days were long. But it still was fun for me a lot of times because of the people I was working with. And that was so true at this Olympics. Was the team was amazing. I was so proud of everyone, even with long days. Some folks had longer days than others. They were really just like bringing the positive attitude. And there's just one of those things, like I got complimented on having a good attitude. And I just really was like, I don't think it would help for me to be grumpy. Like, we're all tired. We've all had long days, but also we are at the Olympics and this is really dang cool for what we're doing. And as an empath, I always think of like other people and just thinking like the athletes, some of these athletes, this is their one day competing. And so I got to make sure it's as awesome for them as it was for the folks that were with us on day one. And so that's something that like the people continued to make the project, because if folks were grumpy and really unhappy to be there and inflexible, like that would have made it really tough to do an event like that. And so if you're someone who's looking to break into the Olympics, just know like you're kind of auditioning for those roles at other gigs. And I can't tell you which gigs they're using for you to audition for, but I do know I am getting some of these opportunities because I've made positive impressions on folks at other projects. Because so much of like the job I got, it wasn't posted online. It was something that I got referred to word of mouth from somebody else, who then vouched for me, who then that's how I got in. And the only reason they're vouching for me is because they had a positive experience with me in the past. And so that's just something to really think about if you're trying to build your career in events. Maybe it's not the Olympics, but it's something else. Is like you can only control how you react in a situation. So bringing your positive attitude, or you don't have to be like happy, charming all the time, but just like know that it goes noticed when you're on day 7 of a long week-long event, a 10-day event, and you're still able to bring a positive attitude in the morning and tell people hi and make a little joke of how great it is to be here. Like that gets noticed over the person who maybe is a little bit quieter. So having that positive attitude can just really help open doors for you career wise. And I think ending here with like what most surprised me about this Olympic experience, I have done the Olympics before. I still had that imposter syndrome I feel right before a big event like this, where I definitely was thinking I was out of my element, didn't know exactly, how I was going to fit in with my team and in my role. And then I got on site and I realized, oh, this is just like all these other events I've done. It's just different verbiage, slightly different people. We're in Italy, different country than where I've been. And I was able to kind of lean into like, no, I know what I'm doing. I know how to write amazing, like a really good run of show. I know how to move things around like we have to and adjust and adapt. And like, that's all part of it. And then what really solidified it for me was when I got to show call some of the days, and I'm sitting in the producer chair and we were doing freeze cam, which is this really fun camera where I got to, as the producer, have a lot of control over it, which was just fun because usually it's the MC gets to do it or the DJ. But the way we did it is I would go 3, 2, 1, freeze. Be when our camera would have a live shot of fans, but we had this graphic that went over and it was like an overlay that made them look frozen. And our MC would coach them when the music stops, you got to freeze in whatever dancing position you're in. We would freeze, in quotes, freeze the screen, stop the music, and we'd hold it for as long as we wanted to, which was really fun because that meant as long as I wanted to. So it was really fun as we played with this over the days, because we repeated it a couple days, was like waiting till you had someone doing really big, crazy moves. Then you go 3, 2, 1, freeze. And it would just be silence. And you could just see this person on screen just trying to like hold whatever crazy position they were in. And then I would say go, and the music would start, and we'd remove the overlay, and it would just be regular camera shots. And I just remember doing that one of the days, and I had this just big goofy grin on my face, and like just had this feeling like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, which is a pretty dang cool feeling. And a lot of the times, like those are the anecdotes for like why I do what I do, because there's a lot of days where it's maybe not as fun, or long days, you're getting sleep deprived. There's lots of drawbacks to working sometimes in this high stress environment. But it's those moments where I just literally feel like joy was just like flying out of me, that I'm doing what I'm meant to do. So working the Olympics, I mean, it's always a reminder just how powerful some of these live events can be. It's not just for the people watching on TV, but also the athletes, who are competing, and the people who traveled across the world to get to experience them in person. I was fortunate enough, I did get both my parents and my partner, Archie, were able to come and support me in person, which was super cool. And they were there for my first medal ceremony I called, which was really fun. And it's just always nice when I can like have my personal life meet my work life, and they got to meet everybody over several meals and several days. And so that was something that was just really cool to do. And like I said, I do events where I can't invite people. So this one was particularly special, I feel like, to get to experience and have them there for. And the Olympics always remind me of the power of sports to cross cultures, to cross languages. We had fans from all over the world who were there, and people were able to have very positive interactions with each other, which just at a time when international relations, especially being in the US, feel particularly fraught right now. That was something that it just warmed my heart. Again, it was just such an uplifting experience. That brings me to the end of the episode. If you've ever been curious about what happens at behind the scenes at like a big sporting event, I hope this gave you a little window into how those moments come together. I probably am going to do a series later this year. If not, I will definitely will work it into next season, where I do want to interview some folks who do other roles at the Olympics, because I just think it's interesting for you guys to see a little bit more of a holistic view of all the opportunities there are around the games, especially with LA coming up next in 2028. But I do want to leave you with a little nugget of like, if you could attend any Olympic event in person, which one would it be? And you're welcome to message us later about it. But I just thinking of like, what one, if you could go in person and watch, would it be, and why? And since you're stuck with me for this episode, I have your bonus tip. And my bonus tip is for anyone here who is a producer or a show caller, please, please, please advocate for some pre-production. That means some time before you arrive on site to execute that event. That's what I would call pre-production. Some people call it pre-planning hours. I've just found anytime you can find like some client-facing time before you're on site, it just helps you build trust and understanding with the client before you're on site and under those like on-site stresses of the event. Kind of looping in with like what I mentioned at the Olympics, it's nice to ask all those questions in that setup week before you're in the rush of the event itself. It's the same thing. No matter if the event's a day, 3 days, 5 days, a week long, 2-hour event, any pre-production time you can get. For example, like for me, if I'm doing show calling for a corporate client or a nonprofit even, and they don't have a large investment to be able to bring me on for a lot of pre-production, at a minimum, I like to do 10 hours. And that includes my personal prep time, but also a couple calls with the client or whoever it is, just to start building some of that trust so that when you get on site, you're not doing introductions and having to have them trust you. You've already laid a little bit of that groundwork with the pre-pro. Well, that brings us to the end of the episode. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Better Events Pod. You can email us at bettereventspod@gmail.com. You can always connect with us directly on LinkedIn. Just let Mary and I know you heard about us through the podcast. We love hearing from you. And if you want more Better Events content, join our private community over on Substack. We have a free version and we have a paid version that helps us continue to do what we do here for free on the pod. As always, we want to thank you for listening, and we'll be back in your feeds again next Wednesday.